Welcome back to Nothing But the Truth. I'm Trudy Stern, and tonight's show really, really matters, and I'm so happy to have you with me. Right now, two serious situations are unfolding in the world, and while they may seem far apart, they are part of the same larger fight. The first is happening close to home in Venezuela. The Maduro regime is weaker than it looks, more dangerous than it admits, and deeply tied to drug cartels that are flooding our hemisphere with narcotics and violence. But it goes even further than that. Venezuela has also become a safe haven for terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, a place where they can hide, train, raise money, and grow far from the Middle East and dangerously close to the United States. This isn't just a foreign policy problem, it's a direct national security threat. And the question tonight is simple. Are we moving toward a confrontation between the United States, the Maduro regime, the cartels, and the terror networks operating under their protection? The second situation is unfolding thousands of miles away, the war between Russia and Ukraine. After years of fighting this war, it's reaching a critical point. Lines are shifting, resources are stretched, and the outcomes will shape Europe's future. NATO's strength and America's credibility around the world are on the line. Our allies are watching closely, and so are our enemies. They are fronts in a larger global war, one that pits authoritarian regimes, terror networks, and criminal organizations against the United States, our allies, and the international order that we have defended for decades. Tonight, we're not just asking what's happening in Venezuela and Ukraine, we're asking how these battles connect and what they tell us about the world we're heading into. And to help us break us all down, we're joined by someone who has spent his career dealing with real world threats, not theories or talking points. Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery served more than 30 years in the United States Navy. He flew combat missions, led operations, and helped plan U.S. military strategy at the highest levels. One of his key roles was serving as Director of Operations at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, where he oversaw military activity in one of the most strategically important regions in the world. After leaving the Navy, he continued his service in Congress, working with the House Armed Services Committee to help lawmakers understand emerging threats and make decisions that protect the country. Today, he's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, where he focuses on global security challenges, including Russia, instability in the Western Hemisphere, and the larger war that connects these conflicts. Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, thank you so much for being here, and we are honored to have you share your thoughts and knowledge on these very complex topics.
Trudy, thanks, man, for having me. I'm really excited to get digging into both these issues.
So let's start closer to home. Let's start with Venezuela. What's the situation in Venezuela, if you could break it down for us?
So I think that here's where we are in this situation. President Trump is trying his most to do this without a war. What he's doing is ramping up the pressure on Maduro to convince him to leave. So what he started to do is first he attacked the actual narco-terrorism that comes out of Venezuela, which it's not fentanyl. Fentanyl is a big problem in the United States, so we need to handle it. And the president's doing that separately. Here he's taking care of cocaine delivery. Basically, cocaine paste comes from Colombia, is processed, refined, and then distributed in Venezuela, and then sent out to Europe and the United States in small boats that go to islands and then hop off from there. He first attacked those, tried to put some pressure on them. Then he labeled the Cartel of the Suns or Cartel de los Sols that Maduro runs, a narco-terror, a foreign terrorist organization. That's a big deal. That gives him big authorities to take action. This is about putting pressure on. Then he brought in the aircraft carrier along with the ship. He's got a lot of ships, Marines off the coast. More pressure on. He's flying combat operations, F-18s and F-16s nearby, B-1s and B-2s doing missions nearby. More pressure on. Now, finally, he's starting to say, look, I may do land strikes on your different areas, and we can talk about those in Venezuela. All this is a maximum pressure. And finally, he's begun to say, he's already taken one sanctioned, he's boarded and taken one sanctioned ship, and he's threatened to take others, and there's up to 30 that he could do that to, that deliver, these are shadow fleet ships that deliver Venezuelan oil around the world. What he's trying to tell Maduro and his associates is your days are numbered. Your narco-terrorist regime that you've extracted all the money you can from Venezuela and bled the country dry, those days are over. Leave peacefully, or I will remove you.
Well, how dangerous is the Maduro regime?
Well, so Maduro's not invading the United States, right? I don't think he can't do any what you call traditional cost imposition, an airstrike or ship strikes. Can't do that. What he can do is facilitate, enable, finance, and drive drug trade in the United States, and that's what he's done. And I acknowledge, again, not fentanyl, cocaine's not fentanyl, but cocaine's bad. Cocaine kills communities, and about 50% of his cocaine eventually ends up in the United States. So he's hurt us that way. But truthfully, he is not going to. The president's not doing this because he thought there was a direct kinetic threat to the United States. He's doing this because Maduro represents a type of regime he does not like, a narco-terrorist regime.
Well, Maduro is also part of the group of countries that are causing all sorts of global havoc. Can you talk about that?
So that's another great point. So, there's four that we kind of talk about: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, who truly are the worst of the worst. They're directly pressuring Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel, and South Korea, those four countries, and they're helping each other do it. Underneath them is a group of countries that enable this: Turkey, Qatar, Venezuela, Cuba. These are countries who, while they may not be at the top tier willing to fight, they're willing to contribute to undermining the democratic regimes around the world, to trying to weaken the societal resilience in those countries. That's what pushing drugs into our country is about. It's about breaking our societal resilience. That's what China does against Taiwan. That's what North Korea does against South Korea, and the other places, Iran against Israel, they would actually attack them, and they have attacked them through surrogates like Hezbollah and Hamas, and obviously Russia's invaded Ukraine. But these other ones, they do it in a more nefarious way, without kinetic operations, but they undermine democracy around the world. Venezuela is kind of a lower tier member of that alliance of evil.
It's such a great point that you make, that it's a way of undermining our society. Like, I don't think the average person thinks about the drug trade or, drugs having to do with breaking up democracy or an actual tool in the weapons of war.
Yeah.
But they obviously are. And I think that is something that needs to be recognized. Like, this is part of a global war that's being waged, and this is one of the tools in the shed.
Well, look, the president the other day on fentanyl, did an executive order labeling it a foreign terrorist problem for us. It is fentanyl. Look, the number of deaths has gone down recently because the president has tightened the border up, but we've lost, 500,000 people over 10 years to fentanyl. That's a lot of. We didn't lose. That's World War II level casualties. That's 8 Vietnams, 10 Koreas, 20 Gulf Wars worth of casualties. That this is a serious thing, and this isn't killing. Be careful, I say this. It's not killing 60 to 90-year-olds. This is killing 18 to 40-year-olds. It's killing young kids who might even be trying a drug for the very first time, don't understand it's laced with fentanyl. This is a significant issue, undermining our national security, our economic prosperity, and our public health and safety. If that doesn't define a national security problem, I don't know what does. In the case of fentanyl, by the way, those precursor agents are coming from one country, China. This is an authoritarian state that could stop this at their ports, chooses not to. It ships to Mexico, where the government has no control over the ports, where the terrorist organization, the narco-terrorist organizations there, take the precursor agents, make fentanyl, and then ship it into the United States.
Wow. So does China itself limit the fentanyl in their own country?
It almost non-existent.
So typical.
Yes.
So
This is an authoritarian state. This is how they undermine things. Yeah, it's awful.
that's really horrible. So let's just talk for a moment about groups like Hamas and Hezbollah being able to exist and live freely in Venezuela, and not just exist, but have training camps, recruit new members. How dangerous is that?
So obviously my number one concern with Hezbollah is in Lebanon. They pose a daily risk to Israel. I fully expect Israel in the next 3 months to have to readdress this issue and conduct a series of significant air operations to put Hezbollah back in a weakened position because the government of Lebanon is unable to control Hezbollah. So that's the deepest threat of Hezbollah. Obviously, Hamas worries me the most in Gaza, where they've undermined security efforts there and are going to really make it hard to move to phase two. So I acknowledge fully that that is the primary challenge in the Middle East. But these kind of organizations, and there's other IRGC or Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas that are allowed to operate freely in other kind of axes of aggressor states, whether it's Qatar, Turkey, or Venezuela. So anytime they're offered this kind of freedom of movement, freedom of training, freedom and ability to raise funds, this is risky. And it places Israel, the United States, and other democracies at risk, but principally Israel and the United States. So that's yet another reason to be uncomfortable with Venezuela. And I will say that has not been the number one reason, one of the top reasons that President Trump's got more reasons than that. And he's taking this from I wouldn't say purely U.S. national security, but predominantly U.S. national security interest and saying, I'm going to solve this. I mean, the irony is the Europeans are kind of critical or silent about what he's doing in Venezuela. The cocaine he's cutting off, 50% of it was headed to Europe. And should he strike these processing plants in the next few weeks, like I think he might, he's going to be, taking cocaine, a significant amount of the cocaine distribution to Europe off the board.
Wow. I certainly hope he does. But I think actually, with the borders having been open under the Biden administration, and now having what they tell us, tens of thousands of terrorists living within our own borders, of undocumented illegals who've come across the border during the Biden administration, in coordination perhaps with Hamas and Hezbollah that's operating in Venezuela, it might be a national security risk to the United States as well, having Hamas and Hezbollah operating over there freely. Would you say that's accurate?
So I think in general, the open border policy that allowed literally millions of people not properly vetted and documented into our country is a security risk. That's why one can have an argument about how you deal with the people who are in the country, and I recognize there's a reasonable argument going on about that. You cannot disagree with President Trump's decision to secure the border. Countries should have secure borders. Almost every other country in the world, it's a given that you have a secure border. But for some reason in the United States, it was seen as a threat to democracy to secure the border. It's a threat to democracy not to secure the border. The border is secure. Now, look, there are some borders that you can maintain at a different level of security because you have a relationship with the country involved, an understanding of what flows back and forth, how they control flow. So Canada is different than Mexico. Canada is different from Mexico because they're only land borders with us. Mexico, has land borders going south with countries that have open borders themselves. So things can flow all the way from Venezuela, Colombia, up through the Central American countries and in through Mexico and in the United States. So did we take a risk with that? Yes. Are we working slowly and deliberately to eliminate that risk? Yes.
Wow. Okay. Seems like, you know, the president has a lot to take care of with regard to national security.
Yeah.
Um, what should we be paying attention to as Americans going forward with regard to this Venezuela
Yeah.
situation?
So I think two things are going to happen. The president would like to do this without combat. He would like to have Maduro flee. He might, but he also might not. If he doesn't, here are the two things I'd watch. Do we aggressively start seizing what are called ghost fleet or the otherwise unregistered cargo oil vessel, oil merchant oil cargo vessels that are shipping Venezuelan oil around the world. If we begin to grab those ships so that they can't trade money, that's going to really ratchet up the pressure. The second thing I'd look at is do we do airstrikes on the drug reprocessing facilities? Ahead of that, we might have to strike their airfields and their air defense systems, but it would be a fairly quick, 3, 4 day campaign to eliminate the air defense and air systems, and then to strike the factories, the storage facilities that the narco cartels use for cocaine. To me, that would be the next level of pressure ratcheting up. So those are the two things I'd look for over the next 2 to 4 weeks.
Could you see or envision China jumping into this to aid Venezuela?
I think Venezuela now knows they're on their own. I mean, Russia isn't. If Russia wanted to help, they couldn't. Cuba's smart enough to keep its paws back, and China will stay out. Uh, you know, China's glad it's one more distraction from getting ready for, combat over Taiwan. Their primary goal is in the Western Pacific. That's why they fund the Russia-Ukraine war. It distracts us. They don't care if Russia wins. They're bleeding Russia. China's interested in one thing, and that's China's national security objectives, and that's it.
And what would you say those are?
China would like to, take back full control over Taiwan without destroying Taiwan. In other words, without a conflict where they can break the societal resilience of Taiwan. The United States doesn't respond, and Taiwan fully integrates into China, similar to how Hong Kong has done.
Wow. Um, okay, so now let's shift to another major front. But before we shift, I have one last question on the
Yeah.
Venezuela situation. Could you see a full out war erupting with regard to Venezuela and the United States?
No, because we control escalation management. We have all the tools, and the president will not let that happen. I've been critical of the president in certain areas, but I've never thought this president was for regime change anywhere. He would like Maduro to leave. He'd like the Democratic president to take over. He is not going to put boots on the ground to achieve that. He's going to try to convince Maduro to leave through an increasing stress test. And he has a lot more steps in that ladder before any troops go anywhere.
And what happens if Maduro just doesn't leave?
One of the steps is to kill Maduro,
I see. Okay. See,
probably near the top of the ladder.
okay. All right. You heard it here first. Okay. Let's see whether that plays out. So now let's move over to the next front, and that is the Russia-Ukraine front. Where do we stand with that? Where does the war stand at this point?
So, as I've mentioned to you before, I spent quite a bit of time in Ukraine training their forces. I am biased, but I think I get a reasonable look at it. I do not think their ground forces will lose on the ground in combat. They will not. They'll lose little bits of kilometers here, kilometers there.
Ukraine. You're talking about Ukraine.
In Ukraine, yeah. They're not going to collapse. So I think their resilience is strong. The resilience of their military, the resilience of their society is strong. Now, look, things can get worse for them. Russia can continue to use cruise and ballistic missiles and drones to kill civilians and destroy civilian infrastructure, and they do that every night. They experience, if you add any 2 nights together, they get more cruise and ballistic missile attacks than the worst night Israel experienced in the war with Iran. It's just this, it's just, and they shoot, they're not near as successful as the Israelis are at shooting down weapons. The Israelis are about 95% successful. The Israeli and U.S. forces that were in in Israel. We're about 95% successful. The Ukrainian forces are about 65% successful. So a lot more things hit. So it can be worse for the people, but I've never seen any cracks in the societal resilience. They know they are not willing to do it. So they're not going to break. And if they're not going to break, and we're not going to put sufficient pressure on Russia to come with a reasonable ceasefire agreement, I see this war continuing. I think Putin would like one more summer offensive, at least in 2026 at a minimum. And so I think Putin's fully capable of just ignoring President Trump's good offers, of a legitimate, peaceful ceasefire. He'll make no concessions, and then we'll be left with another year of fighting in 2026. I think that's almost unavoidable at this point.
And how does NATO play into this whole picture, and
Yeah.
how critical is that?
So the president's really stepped up, and I would say since the president said, "I am not going to provide weapons to Europe," you can use my defense industrial base, but I am no longer paying. My predecessor paid about, in the end, it was about 30 billion a year in military security, a total of about 68 billion that Joe Biden provided, or the Biden administration provided. He said, "I'm not going to do any more of that." And the president's kind of kept that. He's probably provided about 500 million over the year. I mean, that's a real drop off. The Europeans have stepped it up a little bit. They've still given to date this year about 25 billion. In fact, at this point, the Europeans have given more than the United States when you aggregate it. But that's because we've had a year of basically zero. So they're starting to do it. And here's the key, though. We're still a key player because Europe still can't make the weapons. They can make a small portion of the weapons they need to give Ukraine. They need to buy them inside our defense industrial base. So President Trump has set up a program called Pearl, or PURL, where Europeans can buy $1 to $2 billion a year. $1 to $2 billion a month. That's billion with a B per month. So 20 to 30 billion a year worth of equipment that's necessary. And we still provide intelligence support that helps the Ukrainians in their targeting, to make sure they don't have many civilian casualties in Russia, but instead hit military targets, which is a smart thing to do. So that's the support we're at right now. Access to our defense industrial base and access to some intelligence support.
So, which country at this point, Ukraine or Russia, has the momentum, in your opinion?
Look, Ukraine's had a rough 3 months. They have lost a little bit on the ground, not a lot, but a little bit. They had a massive corruption scandal, which they're handling. I mean, here's the beauty. They're you know how we know they have a corruption scandal? They're a democracy. They had a anti-corruption organization investigate and define three of the most senior officials in the government, three of the top 10 officials guilty of corruption, and they've all been forced out of office and are facing criminal charges. Something that would never happen in Russia. I mean, Russia is a criminal gang running the state. So it's like but those are rough. They're rough on him, and it's tough. I mean, you look at Zelensky. He's been a fairly strong, I'd say on occasion, heroic leader for 2.5 years. That's got to weigh on you. So you can see fatigue, but I still see stubbornness and resilience, within that fatigue. So I think they'll be okay. But who has the upper hand? Russia never negotiates. So I guess the longer President Trump believes he can get a concession out of President Putin without pressuring him, then I guess Putin's winning. But we'll see over time. I'm not sure. It's too hard a question, I think.
So the outcome of this, what message would that send to America's adversaries?
So that's what's key here. This is one of the axis of aggressors trying to impose its will on a democracy. This is exactly where we support Israel against Iran. We support Taiwan against China. We support South Korea against North Korea, and we should support Ukraine against Russia. If we want to maintain the world order that allows the United States to run the economic end of it and profit, I mean, one of the things that's crazy is the degree to which we've maintained 25% of world GDP, gross domestic, 25% of the world economy is American over the last 30 years, despite the fact that we're a very small percentage of world, we're 5% of world population. I mean, we're very disproportionately wealthy. We benefit from this system. And so we want to keep that system running. And the way you do that is you prevent autocracies from flourishing. And China's the worst, China and Russia are the biggest and the worst of the worst, but Iran and North Korea, Venezuela and Qatar and Turkey, they all have significant flaws.
So, can you connect the dots for us between Russia, Ukraine, Venezuela? I mean, these are we saw the dots very clearly with Israel with the seven, you
Yeah.
know, adversaries with Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis. Can you connect the dots between Russia,
Sure.
Ukraine, and Venezuela?
So first, I'll say Ukraine's a great place to look at the four of them working, the four bad guys working together. They're fighting Russia. We see that. We've all heard that North Korea provided 12,000 troops, which they did to fight the Ukrainians, and 5 million rounds of ammunition, which, it's more ammunition than we've ever produced, since World War II. That's how much North Korea gave Russia. Iran gave the Russians that Shahed drone that has been used aggressively against Israel. They gave it to Russia, and then they built a plant for them in Russia. So Russia now builds its own thousands per month, and including a modernized one, which they're now giving back to Iran, it's got a jet motor in it instead of a propeller, which makes it much more challenging for the air defense systems in Ukraine and in Israel. So they're working together. And then finally, China's backstopping this whole effort. They've backstopped the Russian economy, 30% increase in trade, 30% increase in investment. They're providing microelectronics for Russian cruise ballistic and hypersonic missiles to hit um, Ukraine. So all four countries, Ukraine is fighting four countries simultaneously. If you think of it that way, then you realize, who was Israel fighting? Who supports Iran? It was Russia and China. Who's providing Iran with new air defense weapons right now as we speak? China, right? Who tried to help with their nuclear program? North Korea. The connections are deep in all this. And then you look at Venezuela. Who's provided weapon systems? What kind of air defense systems does Venezuela have? The same as Iran, Russia, and China, S-300s. I mean, this is these countries work together. Look, they're not tight allies like us in the United Kingdom, the United States, United Kingdom in World War II. That's not what this is. They may be allies of convenience, they may be transactional allies, but they're supporting each other nonetheless. And it just makes it that much harder think of a democracy like Israel, 10 million people having to go against, four countries, one of whom's 150 million, another 100 million, another 1.4 billion. I mean, these are disproportionate odds if you're left to fight alone. That's why the United States, some NATO countries, Israel, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan all have to band together.
Wow. I mean, it's when you connect the dots like that, it's really an overwhelming uh, conflict that we are facing here in the United States. It seems like the world is truly at war right now, all over the place.
We're definitely at hybrid war. Look, there's a hot war going on in Ukraine, and the war between Iran and Israel goes hot and goes cold, goes hot and goes cold. But there's a hybrid war everywhere all at once, right? China's information operations. So if you think about what TikTok is doing inside our country, screwing up the net, twisting a national security narrative to hurt United States interests, hurt Israeli interests, hurt Ukrainian interests, spread anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. It's everywhere. You see it. Yeah, Russia's doing like small explosives in Eastern Europe, drone attacks in Eastern Europe, cyber attacks in Eastern Europe. Everywhere you look, Iran, North Korea, Russia, China are trying to destabilize things. Yes, we're in a constant low-level hybrid war with these, and it flares up routinely.
Well, what we see now and today, though, is much, much more than
Yeah.
I can remember seeing over the last 30 years. So, what caused this? This obviously seems to have been festering. Was this
Yeah.
organized strategic plan of these nefarious countries together to undermine the West on their in the United States on their college campuses and through TikTok, through the youth, and through the drug trade. Then you have the Israel front. Then you have what's going on with Russia, Ukraine. Like, is this an organized strategy that erupted with 10/7?
No, so I think it predates that. So I think that this is in the background. All these countries are working, not integrated well, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, but they're all working to undermine their direct adversary, Iran, say Israel, Russia, Ukraine, and a few other countries. But what happened was two things. One, we did not stand up to the Chinese challenge. But China internally was saying our only adversary is the United States from 2000 on. By 2010, the US military knew that's what China thought, but our government did not take up the mantle till about 2020, where we finally acknowledged we're in a competition with China that's really become adversarial. So very slow to confront China, that enabled them and emboldened them. And here's the second big one. Our withdrawal from Afghanistan was a complete disaster, not just in the execution that led to 13 American deaths and, you know, leaving behind 100,000 Afghans that worked with us, that helped us, that saved our lives. Leaving NATO. By the way, we told NATO like 5 hours before we hit the execute button. That's not how you treat allies who join you in a war for 20 years. You don't go 5 hours ago, hey, by the way, we're leaving. The Biden administration's both their decision making to get to the withdrawal, their execution of the withdrawal, and their post-execution performance were a disaster. And then to not even acknowledge it, Russia looked at that and said, well, look, if the United States thinks that's how things should be, I guess that's a green light. And a year later, not even a year later, the 4 months later, they're invading Ukraine. And from my perspective, if you're watching this, you're like, well, the United States appears to be stepping back. And then the IRGC, the Iranians decide we're gonna push harder on these things. There's a lot of reasons October 7th happened. I don't want to pin it on the axis of aggressors. There was some decision making inside Iran, inside Hamas, but it's all enabled, informed, and emboldened by our poor response to the rising China, defeat in Afghanistan, debacle in Afghanistan. And and then our failure to our support to Ukraine was kind of a weird parts only, and that happens to work for Israel, but uniquely only for Israel.
So actually, we're extremely lucky that Biden did not win a second term, because sounds like we really could never have survived as a country another 4 years under that really terrible positioning.
Yeah, look, I'll be honest, I was unhappy with the Biden administration at the end. I'm not thrilled with President Trump's feelings on Ukraine. I don't think he's handling Ukraine right, but I think he's handling Israel and Iran right. And I think he's starting to be more aggressive with China. I mean, last night, he approved a major foreign military sales package to Taiwan, $10 billion worth of gear. That's them buying it from us, not us giving it to them. Them buying it from us. It's going to make them more effective. So look, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. On the really major power issues, President Trump's making some good calls. I do wish we're a little more aggressive in putting that twist to President Putin economically.
In looking at all of these different fronts, I'm going to ask you one final question.
Mm-hmm.
What do they tell us about the global fight that the United States is facing all over the place right now?
Look, I know President Trump doesn't like to hear this, but the problem is we are the indispensable nation for a lot of reasons. One, we like the economy, the way the world economy, as I explained earlier, the global economy benefits us. So it's in our national interest. Two, we believe in supporting democracy. There's a reason Israel's our ally in the Middle East. They're the bright, shining example of democracy. There's a reason Taiwan is our ally. When you contrast Taiwanese democracy, capitalism, that Taiwan's a little mini Israel. when you compare it to China, which is another version of the Soviet Union. And then when you look at South Korea versus North Korea, South Korea has crazy, crazy elections every 6 years, but they're elections and they swap power back and forth and they yell at each other and scream at each other. It's it's Israeli democracy, and North Korea is another Soviet state. So we're the country that makes sure those democracies can flourish as democracies. And you know what? Every one of those countries I just listed is a great trading partner of the United States. Israel is where we get a lot of software, especially cybersecurity software. Taiwan's where we get our semiconductor manufacturing logic chips, and South Korea is where we get our semiconductor um, memory chips. I mean, these are three great allies, and so the lesson learned for us is there's both a national security interest and a values interest that makes the United States the partner for these important countries.
Wow, I could really continue talking to you for the next 3 hours, and I think our listeners would love to hear from you. Sadly, our time is coming to an end, but we do want to have you back to help us really unpack all of these events as they happen. So we hope that you will join us again.
Well, yes, ma'am. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so you've been listening to Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery. Tonight's conversation made one thing very clear. The threats facing the United States today aren't isolated. They aren't theoretical. From Venezuela, where drug cartels and terror networks are finding safe haven close to our borders, to Ukraine, where the outcome of this war will shape global power and American credibility for years to come. These are all fronts in a larger global struggle that demands serious attention and clear thinking. Thank you. Thank you, Admiral, for helping us connect those dots and for bringing real world experience to a conversation that too often gets lost in headlines and politics. But most importantly, thank you for your decades of service to this country and for continuing that service by helping the public understand what's at stake. So thank you so much, Admiral, for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us. This has been Nothing But the Truth with Trudy Stern. You can catch us every Thursday at 9:30 p.m. on the radio. And if you missed this or any part of this show or want to listen to any of our past episodes, you can find Nothing But the Truth wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and keep seeking nothing but the truth.